In 2009, Flight 714 vanished over the Altai Mountains without a trace. No wreckage. No distress call. 128 people, simply gone. Over a decade later, a scientist on vacation stumbles upon the frozen remains of the plane buried deep in the ice. But what he finds inside is far worse than a crash site. Before we get back to that, I'd love to know where you're watching this video from today, and if you like these stories, make sure you subscribe. It was supposed to be a quiet escape. No lectures. No students. Just snow, silence, and the clean air of the Altai Mountains. Dr. Alexei Morozov wasn't looking for anything except stillness. That's why, when he saw something metallic jutting out of a glacier, something sharp, unnatural, and rusted, he froze. At first, he thought it was a piece of old mining equipment. But as he climbed closer, heart thudding against his ribs, the shape became clearer. A wing. Torn. Crushed. Weather-worn. And barely visible beneath the snow, a faded airline logo. Flight 714. His throat tightened. The plane that disappeared in 2009. Gone without a trace. No signal. No wreckage. Just vanished. With 128 people aboard. He radioed for a local rescue team, but he couldn't wait. Curiosity pulled him forward like a hook in his chest. The fuselage was cracked open, the body of the plane broken like a ribcage. Inside, silence. Frozen luggage. Straps still buckled into empty seats. Scattered belongings, decayed but untouched. And then, he saw them. Footprints. Not old ones, either. Fresh. Clear in the snow leading into the plane. Large, human. But what made Alexei's stomach turn was the fact that there were no prints leading back out. Whoever went in, never came out. Alexei stepped into the wreckage, his boots crunching softly on frost-covered debris. The cold inside was different than the outside, heavier, thicker, like the air hadn't moved in years. The wind outside howled through the broken metal, but within the cabin, everything was unnaturally still. He passed rows of decayed seats, some with frozen seatbelts still buckled, others twisted or missing. A child's toy, a plush rabbit with one eye, sat alone in an aisle, its fur stiff with frost. Luggage lay torn open, their contents scattered and rotted. No bodies. No skeletons. Only absence. And yet, that was impossible. 128 people don't just vanish. Then he saw the notes. Pinned to walls with makeshift splinters, stuffed between seat cushions, scrawled across tray tables in smudged ink and smeared charcoal, messages. Dozens of them. Some were final goodbyes. Others were desperate cries for help. A few were prayers. Day 12. Food's gone. Water's ice. We saw something in the snow last night. Watching us. If anyone finds this, tell my wife I didn't give up. Alexei felt the burn in his chest. These weren't just crash victims. These people had survived, for a while. Then something shifted. A faint sound. A soft thump, like something falling. Or, moving. He turned toward the back of the plane, toward the broken emergency exit. Something was there. A shadow. Hello, he called out. Silence. Then, something scraped. He stepped forward, reaching instinctively for his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness and landed on a crude fire pit. Charred sticks. A blackened tin can. Still warm. Someone had been here. Recently. His radio crackled to life. A voice, panicked and distorted, Alexei? Are you there? There's something on the thermal scan. Something's moving. Inside the plane. The flashlight flickered. Something breathed behind him. The inside of the wreckage was colder than outside. Not just in temperature, it was a deeper cold, the kind that sank into your bones and sat there, unmoving. Alexei stepped carefully into the fuselage, his flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the frozen dust. The air tasted of rust and old death. He passed the first row of seats. Then the second. Snow crept in through shattered windows and broken seams. Belongings were everywhere, bags, scarves, even a rusted-out thermos lying on its side, its contents frozen mid-spill. It looked like people had been trying to leave. Or maybe trying to find something. He stopped when he reached the emergency door in the back. It was open. That wasn't possible. These doors were designed to stay locked from the inside unless someone forced them. But this one wasn't torn or broken. It had simply been opened. There were footprints in the frost. Bare ones. Human-sized. They led into the wreckage. Not a single one led out. Alexei's gut turned. This wasn't just a crash site. It was a grave, one someone had walked back into. He moved slowly down the aisle, his light dancing across torn cushions and broken seatbelts. The silence was dense. Not empty, but full, like the wreckage was listening. Watching. That's when he saw the first note. Taped to the back of a seat, its paper yellowed but still legible. Day 14, no rescue. The storm's back. I think something's out there. I don't sleep anymore. Then another, scrawled on a food tray in charcoal. We heard it again last night. It whispers when we stop talking. More messages appeared the deeper he went. Some were angry. Others were heartbreaking. A few made no sense at all. He walked into the snow. Just walked. Smiling. It doesn't want us to die. It wants us to scream. Each note was a glimpse into madness and survival. It became clear that these people had lived here. Days. Maybe weeks. Some had tried to help each other. Others had lost their minds. And yet, no bodies. Alexei stopped near the rear galley. Something shimmered beneath his light. A small pile of melted wax, surrounded by burnt sticks, a makeshift fire pit. But what made his heart stutter was the can next to it. A tin of beans. Half-eaten. Still warm. He leaned closer. Then heard it. A single, slow tap-tap-tap, echoing from somewhere deeper in the wreckage. Professor Morozov, a voice crackled suddenly through his radio, making him flinch. Come in. We've picked up heat signatures. Movement. Are you inside the plane? Alexei pressed his radio button but hesitated. If they came now, would they be in danger too? Before he could respond, the signal dropped. Just static. But something about the interruption made the wreckage feel different. Like he had been noticed. Then, a sound. A rustle. A thump. Coming from the cockpit. He moved fast, flashlight shaking in his grip. The cockpit door hung half off its hinges. Inside, the windows were shattered, ice crusted along every edge. But again, no bodies. Instead, he found a voice recorder, half buried under a frost-covered map. He pressed play. This is Lieutenant Darren Cole. If anyone finds this, do not stay. We were wrong. We thought we were alone. We thought the cold would kill us. But it didn't. It came for the quiet ones first. The ones who didn't talk. And now it's listening to me. A pause. Breathing. It's right outside the cockpit now. If I scream, maybe someone will finally hear us. Then silence. Alexei stared at the recorder. The voice had felt so recent. So close. Suddenly, something banged against the rear wall of the plane. Hard. He turned. And saw a figure. Standing in the aisle. Motionless. Its skin pale, eyes wide, and unmoving. A person? No. Not anymore. Alexei spun around, heart hammering, but the aisle behind him was empty. Just rows of frostbitten seats stretching into darkness. He forced a slow breath and raised the flashlight again, its beam jittering with every tremble in his hand. He wasn't alone. He knew that now. Keep it together, he muttered under his breath, backing toward the rear of the plane. The radio hissed again, but this time there was only static. He tapped it, nothing. He reached the makeshift fire pit again. Beside it, half buried in snow, was a journal. The cover was cracked leather, warped from moisture, but the pages inside were mostly intact. The handwriting was rushed, uneven, as if written during a panic. Day 47. We stopped counting days. Something is in here with us. It only comes when it's silent. When we don't speak. Day 49. It took Mark. No blood. Just gone. Day 50. We hear it breathing now. Alexei's breath caught in his throat. He closed the journal, eyes darting around the cabin. The idea of someone surviving here for weeks, months, was unthinkable. But that voice on the tape, those fresh footprints, the warmth. It wasn't just someone. It was something else. A metallic creak echoed through the wreckage. Slow. Rhythmic. Like footsteps. Alexei turned off the flashlight. Silence. The darkness pressed in around him, and in it, he heard it, faint, almost inaudible. Breathing. Not his own. Heavy. Wet. Just a few feet away. Something was watching him. Then came the voice. Not from the radio. Not from his memory. From directly behind him. You're not the first to find us. Alexei turned. Alexei's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, catching only shapes. Twisted metal. Frost. Shadows that didn't belong. He tried to calm his breathing, but it came out ragged and loud in the silent wreck. I saw someone. Standing right there. I didn't imagine it. He stepped forward. Slowly. Each footfall crunched softly in the frozen debris. His brain screamed to turn back, to run, but curiosity had its claws in him now. There was something off about the shadows in the aisle. They moved differently. They held still like they wanted to be seen, like they were posing. Then a glint of something caught his eye, not far from the crude fire pit. Metal. A zipper. He knelt. A figure was curled up beneath a dirty, frost-covered blanket. For a second, he thought it was another body. But then the blanket moved, subtly. A shiver. He yanked it back, hard in his throat. It was a woman. Barely conscious. Skin cold to the touch, lips cracked and blue. Her eyes fluttered open for half a second, landing on him. Then her voice came, weak, barely audible. You have to be quiet. It listens. Alexei didn't ask questions at first. He just acted. He pulled off his outer jacket and wrapped it around her. She flinched at the warmth. Her body wasn't used to it. I'm going to get you out of here, he whispered. No, she grabbed his arm with surprising strength. You don't understand. If you leave now, it'll follow you. What is it? Her eyes darted to the ceiling. It was never supposed to be here. I think we brought it with us when we crashed. Or maybe it was already in the mountain. I stopped trying to explain it a long time ago. She coughed, then looked him dead in the eyes. You can't scream. Not even a little. It feeds on sound. Alexei was silent. Numb. Then he noticed the wall beside her. Scratched symbols, crude, repetitive circles, spirals, and jagged marks like talons. Some were written in blood. Others in soot. One word repeated again and again, scrawled in different handwriting. Hush. He reached for his radio. No, she whispered, eyes wide. Too late. The radio crackled. Static. Then a sharp voice burst through, one of the mountain team. Dr. Morozov. We see you on the scanner. Wait, there's something near you, do you see? The rest was swallowed by static. The woman shoved him down. Cover your mouth. Don't move. Then came the sound. A long, slow creaking, like metal being pulled apart just outside the fuselage. They held still. The silence was total now. Even the wind seemed to retreat. In the stillness, Alexei heard it. Breathing. Not his. Not hers. Something heavier. Wet. Slow. Inhaling. Exhaling. Just beyond the galley wall. Then it began to move. Soft, but deliberate. Each step made the wreck groan. It wasn't crawling. It was climbing. Along the ceiling. The sound of claws scraping frozen steel. The woman's hands trembled as she pointed upward. Alexei risked a glance. A shape, too long, too thin, clung to the torn aluminum above them. It didn't have a face. Just slits. Like old scars where eyes used to be. Its mouth hung open in a slack, frozen grin that twitched with every breath. It stared directly at them. But it didn't drop. Not yet. Alexei reached for his flashlight. The moment he touched it, the creature snapped its head toward him. No sound had even been made, it just knew. The woman's whisper was barely audible. If you scream, it becomes real. What does that mean? He hissed back. It's not fully here, until you let it in. That's when he noticed something worse than the thing on the ceiling. More footprints. Small ones. Children's. Leading away from where she had been hiding. Into the back of the wreckage. I thought you were alone, he said. She didn't answer. She just closed her eyes. And whispered, you should have never come inside. Alexei swung the flashlight up with shaking hands. Empty space. Nothing but rows of broken seats and shadows. But the voice, it was real. Too clear, too close to be imagined. His pulse thundered in his ears as he slowly backed away, one step at a time, eyes locked on the darkness. The journal slipped from his hand. He crouched to grab it, and froze. Bare footprints. Right in front of him. Bare feet. Human-sized. Pressed into the frost, leading down the narrow aisle toward the cargo hold. They were fresh. The ice around them hadn't even begun to melt. He followed them. Each step felt heavier. The further he moved through the wreckage, the more warped the interior became. Seats bent at odd angles. Overhead bins torn open like something had clawed through them. Ice formed in strange spirals along the walls. He reached the cargo door. It had been forced open from the inside. Alexei climbed down into the dark. The light caught on walls scratched raw, long deep gashes running across the metal like fingernails, or claws. There were more drawings here. Symbols. Circles inside circles. Eyes. Dozens of eyes. And in the middle of it all, something covered in a blanket. Human-shaped. Breathing. Alexei raised his light, just a few inches more. The shape stirred. Slowly. Unnaturally. Like a puppet waking up after years of stillness. He stepped forward, hesitated, and pulled the blanket off. A woman. Eyes wide open, unblinking. Skin pale blue but alive. Barely. She whispered, lips cracked and voice like wind scraping glass. You have to go. It's still hungry. Then her gaze shifted. Over his shoulder. Alexei turned. Something was crawling down the ceiling toward him. Alexei pressed his back against the cold metal wall, every muscle locked. The creature hadn't moved. It hung there, twitching slightly, like it was suspended in thought. Observing. Deciding. The woman beside him, Irina, had gone completely still, her breathing shallow and controlled. She'd clearly done this before. She knew how to survive it. The silence felt radioactive. Any sound might trigger something irreversible. Alexei's ears strained to hear beyond the walls of the fuselage, but there was only the sound of his own blood rushing. Then, something clicked. Not in the plane. In his mind, the creature was waiting for noise, yes, but not just any noise. It wanted a story. A narrative. A crack in someone's mind. He glanced again at the child-sized footprints trailing into the dark corridor behind them. They led toward the service compartments, where crew supplies were kept. Or where passengers might have tried to hide. Irina noticed where he was looking. Her voice was a ghost. That's where they disappeared. The last ones. We thought the cold would kill them, but the cold was never the enemy. He swallowed hard. Then what is? Irina stared straight ahead. Memory. Alexei followed the footprints, Irina at his side. The deeper they went, the more the wreckage began to warp. The metal here didn't just rust, it bent. Walls twisted inward as if pulled by something massive. Lights hung loose. Some flickered, barely functional after all these years. But they flickered in rhythm, like a heartbeat. Then they reached a wall covered in writing. Dozens, no, hundreds, of names, carved directly into the fuselage with fingernails, metal scraps, maybe even teeth. Each name was followed by a number. Elena, 3 days. Tarek, 11 days. Olga, 26 days. Cole, 49 days. Irina, 271 days. Alexei's breath caught when he saw the last one, written in a far smoother hand than the rest. Alexei Morozov, day 0. He turned to her. What is this? They appear when it chooses, she whispered. You didn't write it. But it knew you were coming. His mind reeled. Was this thing intelligent? Was it orchestrating this? Had it called him? Suddenly, they heard a giggle. Light. Childlike. Coming from somewhere behind the wall. Irina flinched. It mimics. That's not a child. Alexei stepped back, but the corridor grew narrower. The further they walked, the more the fuselage felt like it was closing around them. Like the plane itself was alive and listening. Then he saw a door. A service hatch at the very end, slightly ajar. Inside, light. A warm, golden glow, impossible in this dead place. And breathing. Alexei stepped through the hatch, instantly hit by a wave of heat. The room beyond was normal. Intact. No damage. Walls clean. Lights steady. It looked like a part of the plane untouched by time. There were blankets. Food. A working radio. And a woman. Older. Pale. Sitting cross-legged in the center of the room, humming softly. Her back was turned. She was drawing something on the floor with chalk, a large circle, filled with symbols that pulsed faintly with orange light. Irina froze in the doorway. That's not a survivor. Alexei felt it too. There was something wrong with this room. The warmth wasn't comforting. It was suffocating, like a fever. The hum the woman emitted began to harmonize with the low groan of the plane's structure. He stepped forward. The woman stopped humming. Slowly, she turned her head, too slowly. As if resisting gravity itself. Her face was waxy. Her eyes completely black. Why did you come? She said, her voice layered, like 3 voices speaking at once. Alexei couldn't move. You heard us, she continued. You read us. You couldn't resist. You let us in. Irina stepped in front of him. He's not part of this. The woman tilted her head. He is now. Then the walls began to melt. Not with heat, with sound. Low-frequency vibrations rolled through the cabin like thunder underwater. The symbols on the floor lit up. The woman's body twisted, as if unzipping, and something began to crawl out of her skin. Irina screamed. The first scream in hours. And from the shadows, the creature dropped. Alexei stumbled back, the flashlight jerking upward as his foot slipped on ice. The beam caught it, just for a second. A figure. Vaguely human. Gaunt. Elongated limbs bent at unnatural angles. Skin like cracked leather stretched over bones. Its face wasn't a face. Just hollows where eyes should be, a mouth torn too wide, as if frozen in a scream it never finished. Then it was gone. Vanished into the dark above like smoke. The woman on the floor gasped, curling into herself, whispering again and again, "Don't make noise. Don't make noise. Don't make noise." Alexei held his breath. The plane groaned above them, the metal shell flexing with the cold or, God help him, with movement. "What is that thing?" he hissed. The woman shook her head. "It came after the crash. At first, we thought it was a hallucination. Hunger. Cold. But it was real. It lives in the quiet. It watches. Waits. The others, they screamed. It likes the sound." Her eyes locked onto his, fierce despite her exhaustion. "Don't scream." Suddenly, the radio on Alexei's hip crackled to life. A voice, loud and sharp. "Dr. Morozov. Can you hear us? We're..." Static exploded. From above, a shriek pierced the air. High-pitched. Piercing. Not human. Not animal. It heard them. The woman screamed. From the ceiling, the thing dropped. Alexei grabbed her and ran, dragging her out of the cargo hold, into the broken aisle. The thing crashed down behind them, shrieking, limbs skittering over the walls and floor. Lights flickered. Metal screamed. He kicked open the emergency exit and leapt into the snow. The cold hit like a hammer. But they were out. For now. They turned back just in time to see the creature standing at the exit, not chasing, just watching. It didn't need to hunt. It knew they'd come back. They always do. The snow swallowed their footsteps as they ran, breath coming in ragged clouds. The wreckage loomed behind them like a dead god, cold, broken, and watching. Alexei didn't stop until they reached the rocky ridge he'd come from. The woman collapsed, clutching her sides, her lips purple from cold and fear. Alexei knelt beside her. "What's your name?" She hesitated. Then, "Irina." "How long were you down there, Irina?" Her eyes flicked toward the sky, as if trying to calculate time by memory alone. "I stopped counting after the second winter. But I wasn't alone, not at first." She didn't need to say more. He'd read their messages. "What is that thing?" She didn't answer right away. She just stared back at the plane, where the creature had last stood. "It doesn't eat. Not the way you think," she said slowly. "It waits. It listens. It feeds on fear. On panic. The more scared you are, the closer it gets. We tried to stay quiet. Calm. But it knows how to make you scream." Alexei sat in silence. Every part of him wanted to call for help. But the radio was dead. No signal. The cold was already sinking in through his jacket. Then, he remembered, the thermal scan. Before the panic. Before the chase. The rescue team had seen something moving. He reached for the emergency beacon clipped to his belt, still intact. Still flashing. But before he could activate it, Irina grabbed his wrist. Her grip was weak but urgent. "You don't understand," she whispered. "It let me out." Alexei froze. "What?" "It let me leave. It wanted me to find someone." The beacon blinked in his hand. "I think it was waiting for you." Alexei hit the ground hard, shoulder crashing against the cold steel. The scream. The symbols. The woman splitting apart. It was all happening too fast. Irina was on the floor, unmoving. The creature stood between them. Taller than before. Its skin shimmered like frozen oil, constantly shifting. It had no face now, only mouths. Dozens of them. whispering in unison. You opened the door. You looked for us. You remembered. Alexei tried to crawl toward Irina. The whispers grew louder. You came because you were curious. Like all of them. Curiosity is hunger. Hunger is sound. His hand touched something, the emergency beacon. Still blinking. Still active. And the creature noticed. It flinched. A reaction. Alexei's mind raced. It didn't like the signal. Not because it brought rescue, but because it brought noise. Outside noise. Uncontrolled noise. He grabbed the beacon and held it high. You want silence? Take me. Let her go. Everything stopped. For a breathless moment, the plane fell still. Then the creature spoke. Deal. Snow whipped across the ridge as the rescue chopper descended, blades cutting through the blizzard. A team in bright gear raced toward the wreckage, weapons drawn, sensors active. They found Irina half buried in snow, unconscious, but alive. No sign of Alexei. Only the beacon. Still blinking. Later, when they recovered the black box, they discovered something impossible. A new recording had been added hours ago. A voice. Calm. Focused. This is Dr. Alexei Morozov. Flight 714 was not an accident. Something ancient lives in the silence of this mountain. It doesn't kill. It keeps. If you're hearing this, leave. Don't search. Don't listen. Don't be curious. Curiosity is hunger. Hunger is sound. Static. Then silence. But just before the audio ends, if you listen closely, you can hear it. Breathing.